Lonely rancher. Bought a deaf girl sold by her drunk father, then realized she could hear with her. The sun rose slow and silent over the high plains, a golden breath across dry wheat, brushing the roof of an old ranch house where windows hadn't been washed in years. The windmill creaked as if remembering a voice it hadn't heard in a long while. Inside, Samuel Kane poured coffee into a tin mug. He didn't sit. He stood by the window, the steam curling near his cheek like it wanted to speak. But he didn't answer. Not to ghosts. Not anymore. He fed the horses, checked the fence line, watered the mule, always alone. Not because he hated people, but because the ones he had loved were buried in the churchyard 3 miles east. That morning, a wagon rolled up dusty and slow. The man who stepped down had liquor on his breath and shaking hands, his voice scratched like a rusted hinge. "You still want help round the ranch?" Samuel didn't speak, just watched. "I got a girl, strong arms, don't eat much. Bit odd, but quiet, real quiet." Then he said it, flat, like selling a mule. "She's deaf." From the back of the wagon, a girl climbed down, barefoot, dirt on her legs. Her hair was tied with string. She couldn't have been more than 15. Her eyes scanned the barn, the grass, the sky. Not once did she meet Samuel's gaze. The man named a price. Samuel's jaw tightened. His fingers flexed near the buckle of his belt. He didn't like it. Not the trade, not the man, not the silence around the girl. But he reached into the pocket of his coat and pulled out the money, counted it slow, paid without a word. The man staggered back into the wagon and disappeared in a cloud of dust, laughing like he'd won something. The girl didn't flinch. She didn't wave. She just stood there with her arms by her side, like she was waiting for instructions or punishment. Samuel opened the barn door. "You'll asleep in the loft. There's clean water in the pail. You eat what I eat. No lies. No trouble. That's it." The girl nodded once. No sound came from her. As he turned to go back into the house, Samuel looked over his shoulder. She hadn't moved, just stared at the field with the kind of stillness only someone used to being invisible could carry. He didn't know her name. She didn't ask for his. But that silence between them? It was heavy, almost familiar, and far from empty. The girl didn't speak the next day, not even when Samuel handed her a plate of eggs and cornbread. She ate quietly, her eyes flicking up just once, then back down to the chipped plate. He noticed the way her hands trembled when the fork scraped. Samuel didn't ask questions. He just poured coffee, sat on the far end of the table, and watched the wind nudge the curtains. The silence was heavy, but not awkward. It was familiar, like a blanket too worn to be soft anymore, but still warm enough to keep. After breakfast, she followed him outside. Didn't wait to be told, just fell into step behind him like someone used to orders. He gave her a rake and pointed at the hay scattered in the yard. She nodded once and got to work. Her movements were careful, almost too careful, like she thought the rake might bite back if she moved too fast. Around midday she paused. Her fingers brushed her throat. Her eyes scanned the sky, then the hills. Then she froze and dropped the rake. Samuel had seen that look before. The way someone's mind snaps back to a moment they can't escape. It was the same look his wife had when she'd found their boy gone in the river. It was the look he'd seen in the mirror for months after the burial. He stepped closer, not too close. "You all right?" No answer. "Water's by the trough if you need." Still nothing. He turned to walk away, but then she made a sound. Not a word, not even a cry. Just a small breathy hum like a bird testing the sky. He looked back. She was kneeling now, her hand pressed to the ground, eyes shut, almost like she was listening to something under the earth. He felt it then. The quiet guilt, the old wound stretching under his ribs. He should have said no when that drunk brought her. Should have turned him away, called the law, done something decent, not just paid like it was business. But he hadn't, because he saw something in her that reminded him of the boy he lost. The way pain made you silent, made you obedient, made you disappear. That night, she didn't come into the house. When he looked out, she was curled up in the barn loft, no blanket, just her arms wrapped tight around her knees. Samuel sat at the table a long time. The soup went cold. He didn't want someone around, didn't want to care, didn't want to remember what it felt like to fail someone you loved. But when the moon was high and the night had gone still, he walked to the barn with a blanket under his arm. He climbed the ladder slow. She didn't stir when he placed the blanket over her, but when he turned to go, she moved, just a little. Her fingers brushed the edge of the blanket. Then she looked at him, not startled, just grateful, quietly. Samuel didn't speak, but that look, it settled something in him. He wasn't sure what she had survived, but he knew one thing: she didn't deserve to be alone in it. And that meant he wouldn't be alone either. Not anymore. By the third morning, she was already in the yard before Samuel stepped outside. The rake was in her hands, the hay was neat, the chickens were fed. She worked like she owed something. That bothered him. He watched from the porch as she scrubbed a trough that hadn't been cleaned in weeks. He hadn't asked her to. She just did it. Every time she looked at him, it was as if she was waiting for a blow that never came. That afternoon, a wagon rolled by on the ridge. The rider didn't stop, just slowed, looked, then kept going. Samuel's jaw locked. He hadn't told anyone about the girl. No one had asked. He walked it into town that day, something he rarely did. At the post office, he heard it, murmurs behind the counter. "Did you hear? Jack Dolan's girl went missing, the mute one. He sold her, didn't he? Claimed she ran off. Sheriff didn't buy it. Said he's going to find who took her." Samuel's blood ran cold. Jack Dolan. He knew the name. Everyone did. A drunk with land, guns, and friends in the sheriff's office. The kind of man who beat his dogs and bragged about it. He walked home faster than usual, eyes sharp, hands never far from the rifle. That night, she sat by the hearth, peeling potatoes without being told. Samuel watched the way her shoulders flinched each time the fire cracked. He sat across from her and spoke low. "What's your name?" She paused, then took the knife and slowly carved letters into the wood table. "M-A-E, May," he said softly. She nodded once. He tapped the table. "You can read lips?" She nodded again. "Do you trust me?" This time she hesitated. Her hand hovered. Then slowly she raised 2 fingers. Not quite a yes, not quite a no. He didn't press. But that night, while she slept under the quilt he left in the loft, Samuel sat on the porch with the rifle across his lap. Because he knew now, she hadn't just been sold, she had escaped. And Jack Dolan was looking. By morning, the tracks came. Hoofprints near the east fence, cigarette butts. Someone had been watching. Samuel didn't wake her. He saddled the horse, rode out to the sheriff's station. When he mentioned Dolan, the sheriff didn't blink. "Jack says the girl was kidnapped. Claimed she's got issues. Says he's worried for her." Samuel narrowed his eyes. "That man sold her. To me." Sheriff leaned back. "Then you're in trouble too. If she's a minor, you're harboring stolen property in the eyes of the law." Samuel stood still. "She ain't property. Tell that to Jack. Or the judge." The room felt colder than outside. Samuel walked out without another word. That night, he didn't sleep. He fixed the hinges on the back door, packed a bag, cleaned both rifles, and when he walked up to the Kasafat loft, May was already awake. She didn't ask. She didn't speak. She handed him the carving knife. There, on the inside of her wrist, were old scars, straight, deep, and quiet. But it was the new mark beside them that caught his breath. An ear-shaped burn, branded. He looked into her eyes and finally understood. She hadn't been born deaf. Jack had made her that way. The next few days were quiet, but not empty. May stayed close to the house now, helping Samuel with everything from mending the fence to stirring the stew. She still didn't speak, but the silence between them had changed. It no longer felt like absence. It felt like presence, like two people choosing stillness over words. One morning, as the frost melted on the fields, Samuel found her sitting on the back porch. A book was open in her lap. She wasn't reading. She was just staring at it. Her finger traced the edges of each word like she was trying to feel the sound. He stepped closer. "Want me to read it?" She nodded. He sat beside her, stiff at first. Then he began, slowly. His voice was rough, out of practice, but steady. It was a children's book, The Wind in the Wheat. She watched his lips the whole time, eyes locked on the shape of every word. By the end of the first chapter, something cracked in him, not loudly, not all at once, but like an old floorboard finally giving beneath weight it had carried too long. She reached for the book, pointed to a word. Home. Samuel looked at her. Her lips moved for the first time since she arrived. It was soft, barely formed. Home. He felt it deep in his chest. The way a word can return to someone like a lost thing found again. That night, the wind howled across the roof, the kind of sound that rattled bones and memories. He was sitting by the fire, hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had long gone cold. May walked in slowly. No blanket, no book. Just her small frame lit by the firelight. She sat across from him. Then, without asking, she rolled up her sleeve. There were more scars. Not all from burns. Some looked like belt marks, others like rope. She tapped her chest once, then her throat, then pointed at the flame. Samuel understood. She was trying to say something about how the fire had taken her voice. He leaned forward, lifted the edge of his shirt. A jagged scar curved along his ribs. Barn roof gave in. "My boy was underneath it," he said. "I pulled him out. Burned us both. He didn't make it." She looked up, eyes wide, glassy. His voice was steady now. "My wife left after. Couldn't stand the smell of ash. Or me." May reached forward slowly and placed her hand over the scar on his ribs. Not to comfort, not to heal, just to acknowledge. And in that moment, the pain between them didn't feel so lonely. Later, she fell asleep on the floor beside the fire. Samuel covered her with a quilt. He sat back down, watching the embers fade. There was no storm outside yet, but he could feel it. Somewhere out there, Jack Dolan was still looking. But inside this house, for the first time in a long time, Samuel didn't feel hollow. He felt human again, because two broken things had found each other, not to fix what was lost, but to carry it together. It was just past noon when the dust rose on the horizon. Samuel saw it from the field, the way it twisted in the heat, like smoke from an unwelcome fire. A wagon, 2 riders, and a third behind them, on horseback. He walked slowly to the porch, called May in with a calmness he did not feel. "Get inside. Lock the back door." She didn't ask, just obeyed. The wagon rolled up slow, wooden wheels groaning. Jack Dolan sat at the front, his smirk as loud as his stained coat. One hand rested lazily on the butt of a pistol. The sheriff rode beside him. The third man, a deputy, dismounted, and stood by the steps. Samuel didn't move. He stood on the porch like a man who had nothing left to run from. Jack was the first to speak. "Well now, ain't this cozy? Thought you'd play hero." Kane? The sheriff cleared his throat. We're here on legal ground. The girl's been reported missing. Jack claims she was taken. Samuel's voice was low, measured. She wasn't taken. He sold her. In front of my barn. Jack laughed. Drunk talk. Got no witnesses, no paper. Just your word, and a wild girl who doesn't speak. The sheriff looked uneasy. Samuel, law's law. If she's underage and Jack's bloodkin, we're bound to return her unless you've got proof of mistreatment. Samuel didn't flinch. She's got scars, burns, ropes. You want to see them? The deputy shifted, looked down. Jack spat. That girl's touched in the head. Always has been. Needed discipline. I did what was necessary. Samuel stepped off the porch, one slow step at a time. She's not going back. Jack pulled the pistol. She ain't yours. Samuel's hand went to his belt, not for the gun, but for the chain hanging from his pocket. A silver locket, old and dented. He held it up. This belonged to my son. He was her age when he died in a fire I couldn't stop. I made peace with that. He looked Jack square in the eye. But I won't make peace with handing another child to a man like you. The wind picked up. The sheriff shifted in his saddle. Jack growled. You want to die for some broken little stray? Samuel's voice was quiet. If that's what it takes. Then, the sharp click of a gun being cocked. But it didn't come from Samuel. It came from behind him. May. She stood in the doorway, Samuel's old rifle in her hands. Her small arms trembled, but her eyes were stone. She looked at Jack, then at the sheriff. The message was clear. Samuel didn't tell her to lower it. Jack laughed, but there was a crack in it now. You gonna let this stand? He barked at the sheriff. The sheriff looked at May, then at Samuel, then finally at Jack. You sold her, Jack. You told me yourself over whiskey last week. I just did, and want to believe it. Jack's smirk faltered. The sheriff nodded to the deputy. Lower your weapon. Jack shouted, I'll ruin you. No, Samuel said softly, stepping closer. You already did. Now get off my land. The standoff broke. The wagon turned. Jack cursed and spit, but rode off. As they disappeared, Samuel turned to May. Her arms were still shaking. He took the rifle from her gently. You all right? She nodded, just once. But her lips moved again, and though no sound came, Samuel understood every word. I heard everything. The days after the standoff were still, almost too still. No riders passed. No wagons climbed the ridge. But something had shifted. Not in the land, but in the air around the ranch. Samuel mended the gate with steady hands. May raked leaves that didn't need raking. Neither spoke much, but every now and then their eyes met in shared silence, and that said enough. The sheriff hadn't come back, but Samuel knew better than to believe the fight was done. Jack Dolan wasn't the kind of man to walk away. He was the kind who waited, watched, then struck when backs were turned. So Samuel prepared. He sold the last of his cattle, took down the windmill and packed up the small things. The photo of his wife, the locket, the book May loved to trace with her fingers. He didn't explain it to her, but she saw it coming. And she didn't argue. One morning before sunrise, they stood outside the house. The wagon Samuel borrowed was old but strong. May climbed in without a word, blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Samuel paused at the porch steps. His eyes rested on the door, the old rocking chair, the patch of earth where his boy once planted beans that never grew. He dug into the dirt one last time, not to bury something, but to leave something behind. He placed the silver locket there, just beneath the roots of a dying tree. Some things need to stay where they fell, he whispered. May waited as he climbed aboard. The wheels turned slow as they creaked down the path, leaving ruts in the mud that the rain would wash away. They didn't look back. A few miles out, Samuel pulled the wagon to a stop by the river. May stepped down. The water shimmered soft in the morning light. She knelt and dipped her fingers in. Then, for the first time since they'd left, she turned to him and smiled. Faint, crooked, but real. He joined her. There, by the bank, they sat together in silence. A heron lifted off from the reeds. Wind rustled the trees. The world didn't rush them. Samuel reached into the wagon and pulled out the book. He opened it between them, began to read. May leaned close, eyes on his lips. Her fingers traced the page. Then slowly, she leaned her head against his shoulder. He didn't move, didn't speak. But his eyes glistened, not from grief this time, but from something quieter, something like peace. Behind them, the ranch faded into distance. Ahead, nothing certain. But in the middle of that uncertainty, one thing remained. She was not alone anymore, and neither was he. It had been 3 months since they left the ranch behind. The new land sat near the edge of a quiet town no one talked much about. It was smaller, tucked between hills and trees that didn't whisper like the ones back home. But it was enough for a garden, a fence, and a porch that caught the morning sun. May sat cross-legged under the tree, carving shapes into a flat stone. Her hair had grown longer, thicker. She still didn't speak much, but her laughter came sometimes, soft and surprising, like music she didn't know she remembered. Samuel was different too. His hands still bore the marks of labor, but his face had softened in places. He shaved more often. The way he moved was lighter now, not like a man free from grief, but like one no longer carrying it alone. In the evenings, she read aloud. The words came slowly, unsure at first, but stronger with each page. Samuel didn't correct her, just listened, his eyes sometimes drifting close. Dead as her voice filled the room, he built board by board. One afternoon, a letter arrived. The sheriff's name was on the envelope. Inside, only a few lines. Jack Dolan was found dead. Whiskey, fire, and a broken lantern. Sheriff says it was an accident. No more investigations. You're safe. Samuel folded the letter and placed it inside the old children's book. Not to remember, but to bury it with something that meant more. He didn't tell May. But that night, she looked at him differently, as if she knew. Later, as the stars came out, May took his hand and placed it against her ear. Then she pointed at her heart and smiled. The next morning, she saddled the horse without asking, packed a basket with bread and apples, a worn book tucked neatly inside. They rode out together, side by side. At the top of the ridge, she pulled the reins gently and turned her face to the wind. Samuel watched her. There was a small scar on her temple, barely visible now. She touched it once, then looked at him. Not with pain, not with fear, but with life. With quiet, defiant joy. The kind that survives. And somewhere below them, in the soft hush of moving grass, the world kept turning. The past had not disappeared. But it no longer owned them. The girl who had once been silenced now heard with her heart, and the man who had once buried everything had finally chosen to live. And though no one said the words out loud, both of them knew. They had saved each other.